everybody again. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us at this event, this PDW organized under the patronage of the Academy of Management STR division. So this is part of a series of initiatives that we have undertaken with the beginning of the pandemic to keep in touch with the whole academic community. And the topic of today is research and career advancement across academia and the industry. And we are fortunate enough to have three fantastic speakers today that are going to discuss with us several different topics about our own careers and development. And we have here with us Annamaria Conti from HSE Lausanne. She was before in the United States and she just came back to Europe recently. Kniffin from Cornell University, also an academic, and both Annamaria and Kevin are going to share with us their insights about their research on PhDs, publications, and the development of researchers like us. And then we have Muir Macpherson from AON. He holds a PhD from the Wharton School and then took an academic job at Georgetown. And after a few years, he moved to the industry at AON. So the idea for this session is that I will be silent. I don't have much to say, especially with respect to Kevin, Annamaria, and Muir. And Heather Berry, who is the head of the Management Engagement Committee of the Academy of Management, and I will be here together for the 60 minutes that session will last. We will listen to the three presentations of Annamaria, Kevin, and Muir, and then we will open the floor for any questions that you may have for the three fantastic speakers. So I don't want to abuse of your time any longer, and I will ask Annamaria to please start with your presentation. Thanks so much again.
Thank you very much, Caterina, for this wonderful introduction. So let me start by sharing the slides with everyone. Okay. Do you see the slides? Can you see the slides? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So the topics I'm going to talk about today, PhD careers and advisor characteristics, I'll be more specific on these characteristics later on, are going to be topics that I worked on a few years ago. So the papers I will be discussing were either published at around 2015 or had been like working papers for quite some time. It's important to keep in mind that the empirical results that I'm going to show and share with you are very much built on the insights by Paula Stefan, talking about advisors. Paula was my informal advisor while I was at Georgia Tech, in Atlanta a few years ago. So let me start by asking the following question. Where do PhD students go after graduation? For this analysis, which is reported in Research Policy, it's an article that I published with Fabiana Visentin in 2015. We used back then data from EPFL and Chalmers. For those of you who are based in the US or at least outside of Europe, EPFL and Chalmers are very prominent institutions in Europe, and they're both specialized in science and engineering disciplines. They're very similar types of institutions, despite the fact that one it's in Switzerland and the other one in Sweden. So that's why we combine them together. So let's see what happens in terms of careers of the students once they graduate. Well, according to our research back then, the majority of the students after graduation, they would end up in universities or research centers. And others would be spread among non-R&D intensive firms, R&D intensive firms, technology startups, administration. Now, the large proportion of students that end up in academia, here it's a bit misleading because here we're mostly talking about postdoc positions after graduation. However, in subsequent studies, what we realize is that a lot of these students who graduate from their PhD programs, they take 1 or 2, even 3 years of postdoc, and they finally end up in industry. By the way, in this study, what we were doing, besides showing distribution of students, of PhD graduates across the different areas, what we were trying to understand is what were the preferences of the students relative to career outcomes. And we did so using a revealed preference analysis, which employs variations, plausibly exogenous variations in the supply of PhD students. In other words, if we can plausibly hold the demand for positions constant, the variations in the supply determine the career positioning of the students, and from these variations we can infer their preferences. And by implementing this analysis, what we realized is that the preferred career path of the students were career paths at research institutions and also R&D intensive firms. So the idea, we were surprised back then because we had this idea that PhD students, they want to end up in academia after they graduate, but in fact, it's not only about academia, they also care about other positions in the industry. Now, what about gender differences? Are there gender differences when we look at the positions that PhD students get after graduation? Using the same set of data in a paper that we published on PLOS ONE again in 2015, what we saw is that women are more likely than men to end up in academia relative to taking industry positions. Now, is this a good news? Not necessarily, because here, for instance, you find that women, the hazard of women to become professors after they take a postdoc position is much lower for women than for men. So basically, in other words, many women end up taking postdoc positions after they graduate, but very few of them become professors relative to men. Now, in another working paper with Maria Roche is assistant professor at Harvard, and she was a former PhD student of mine at Georgia Tech. We used data from Georgia Tech to assess the role of advisor quality. Advisor quality measured in terms of publication output, number of publications or weighted number of publications according to impact factor. So here, using data from this institution, first of all, we realized that definitely advisor quality seemed to matter according to the students. So these are the answers that PhD students have to provide to the institutions once they graduate. And as you can see at the bottom of this slide, it seems that advisor matter also to provide advice in terms of careers and search for employment. So advisor quality seems to matter for students once they get into the job market after they graduate. So let's zoom in and let's see more in details what happened. So here in this table, what we did is to estimate an hazard model for the hazard that a student end up as faculty member or end up working at a prestigious firm as a function of the quality of the supervisor. As you can see at the top of this table, it seems that advisor quality matters for getting a job as a faculty. It also matters for getting a job at a prestigious firm. Think about Google, think about Facebook or Amazon, although like here the estimates are a little bit more noisy. When we distinguish between engineering and basic science, keep in mind that Georgia Tech is specialized in engineering. We see that advisor quality matters within the engineering domain for both getting a position as a faculty or getting a position at a prestigious firm. So it seems that advisor quality matters, and one of the implications that we got out of the study was that students should carefully select the type of advisors they want to work with, because advisors do not only matter for getting publications, but also for ex post career outcomes. And advisors seem to matter for both getting positions within academia and outside of academia. But this is not the end of the story. In the same set of analysis, using the same sample, we also analyzed the salary that the students were getting after graduating. And here we see that advisor quality matters also for earning higher salaries. And this is especially the case in engineering, which, as I said before, is really like the area in which Georgia Tech is specialized. In a subsequent work, Maria Roche, this is a paper that is in R&R at Organization Science, Maria looked at the effect of the supervisor's entrepreneurial involvement on the career outcomes of the PhD students. In other words, the question she's asking in the paper is, do advisor entrepreneurial activities matter? By advisor entrepreneurial activities, I mean the creation of a startup. And here, what you see, perhaps not surprisingly, is that if the advisor is involved in the creation of startups, the students are less likely to become professors, meaning to remain in academia. Less surprisingly, they appear to be also less likely to work for small firms, but they do appear to be more likely to work for consulting firms. The upshot of this table is that the outcomes of the supervisor in terms of entrepreneurial involvement, they seem to matter a lot for the ex-post trajectories of the students. And if the students are keen on remaining in academia, then probably matching with a supervisor that is so much involved with startups might not be like the better option. So with this, I'm done. I gave you like an overview of the work that I've done and the work of my PhD student using data from both Europe and the US. The upshot is that careers within academia do not seem to be the only path that students tend to pursue, and it seems that students do like positions at R&D intensive firms as much as they like working for academia. There are differences by gender, and also the characteristics of the advisor in terms of research output and in terms of entrepreneurial activities do matter for the ex-post career path of the graduating students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Annamaria. Super interesting and a bit scary also, I would say. So now I pass the baton to Kevin. So Kevin, do you want to share your screen with us?
Great, thanks. And so I'll be able to complement what we just heard from Annamaria, and I want to thank the strategy division for putting this together, drawing attention to these important topics. So I'll talk about career outcomes among PhD graduates, and largely what I'll be talking about relies upon data from the US. So complementary data from what Annamaria was just describing. And so the NSF runs, some of you have familiarity or you will have experience with this survey of earned doctorates, or SED. I'll be calling it the SED or SED for the next few minutes, which has near perfect response, almost 100%. If for the people who don't actually respond, they take efforts to collect and gain data as much as possible on everyone graduating with a PhD in US universities each year. So you can see how that allows for a lot of research on placement and salary for doctorate graduates across fields. So here is this is a working paper that got sunlight in 2020 that remains active and current. So this is the primary focus of what I've been doing with the SED has been looking at the experience of interdisciplinarians. And whenever, so to work with the SED, it's restricted data. To work with the micro data, there's public versions that are not as granular. So to work with the micro data, it's restricted data. You sign a license agreement. As part of that license agreement, there's that disclaimer that you see on the screen highlighted. And so I want to be clear about that disclaimer here. And so that's why, one of the reasons why that is here on the screen. So I've got the link for that paper that I'll share at the end of the talk here today. The NSF has been interested in this work on interdisciplinarians, and they've been funding it to the tune there's two grants that are posted here on the screen. One of them just started in the past year, and that's with collaborators Hanks at Ohio State, Sasa Milosevic at Indiana, and Weinberg at Ohio State. And so just sharing background that there is work being done, looking at career paths among, in this case, we're focusing on interdisciplinarians, but career outcomes more generally of people earning the PhD. Again, using this data from the US. Here's several publications that myself and Hanks have written about that utilize this different versions or different spans of the SED. And I'm going to focus on that last of the papers from Applied Economics Letters, Early Career PhD Salaries, Industry Premium, and Interdisciplinary Debate. So one of the things that this paper does is it substantiates this conventional wisdom really about an industry premium. So, so probably unsurprising result, but confirmatory, is that industry salaries are significantly higher than other employment sectors in general for PhD graduates. One thing to keep in mind is this paper, you see data 2014. This paper was based on the 1 year of the SED that we had access to at the time, and that was the 2010 SED. So I'll share with you in a few screens data from many years of the SED, but at that point in time, it was just the 1 year that we had access to. So just to unpack these tables a little bit, again, from the 2014 paper. So on the left-hand side, you can see these are main effects, so to speak, for, it's an excerpt. If you look at the academic disciplines, the SED aggregates different fields into two-level nested fields. So the top level fields are what you see listed there. And agriculture and life sciences is the reference unlisted in terms of academic disciplines. And if you look at the beta coefficients, you'll see the beta coefficient for business is remarkably high. And that's just reflective of the fact that the salary for the first year after earning a PhD in the United States, for doctoral graduates in the United States, there's a lot of variation across different disciplines, with business being markedly higher than the rest. So that has relevance, because if you look at the excerpt of table 4, and the notation I have on the slide is that that general pattern that I flagged from the abstract of this paper about our industry salaries tending to be higher, that general pattern, again, for the 2010 SED at least, does not hold for people earning the PhD in business, where you see the direction is actually negative in terms of the business asterisk industry row on the excerpt from table 4. So these two excerpts of the tables are relevant, right? Because so there's a big main effect of working in industry, and that's actually on the, if you look at the employment sectors on table 2 on the left-hand side, you see that reflected with the beta coefficient. And then if you focus on business and look at the interaction with different employment sectors, then with education being the reference employment sector for those interaction analyses, you see something that's different than the general population. So, all right, so what about from, again, complementing very much Annamaria's data from Europe, here from doctoral graduates in the United States, aggregating all non-business fields compared to people earning PhDs in business. You can see postdocs are quite uncommon percentage-wise, and that's been true for a while. So the span here from the SED goes back to 95 through 2015, whereas employment and industry, and the SED breaks down government, industry, nonprofit, education, and it also has a postdoc indicator. the percentage of people earning the PhD in business in the US going to work in industry is comparable to people earning the PhD in other fields. There's certainly some fields like engineering where the percentage going in industry is quite high, but again, aggregating all non-business fields to business, you see it's comparable. Just to share some more descriptive statistics here, this is taking the span 1992 through 2015 from the survey of earned doctorates. You're not going to be able to, and I'm not going to try to process all of this here right now, but if you just take, your own favorite subfield or most familiar subfield and try to match the colors, you can see these are the actual numbers of people earning the PhD in these lower level, finer grained fields that the SED is capturing. So if you take organizational behavior, I'm not very good at colors, but that's kind of like it's third from the bottom. Instead of trying to give that color a label, I'll say it's the color that's third from the bottom on the key, and then you'll see south of 200 people each year in the range of around 150 each year graduating that identify themselves as having specialized in organizational behavior. So average salaries across fields and subfields. So this is 2008 when the SED started measuring the salary through 2015. And you can see accounting, that's the gray line at the top, is markedly higher than if you look at the orange on the bottom, that's aggregation of salaries for PhD earners across all non-business fields. And then you can again look through and you see the range of different other subfields, which in between accounting and the non-business fields. So just to close here, and I just want to identify the fact that economists do a good job with respect to kind of assessing the labor market for people earning the PhD in economics. And so Wendy Stock and John Siegfried, for example, not simply the two of them, have written numerous papers that have been published in the flagship AEA journal, AER, that look at, you can see an excerpt of some of their work, the experience of people earning the PhD in economics. And so management could certainly do a better job, I would say, with respect to having more conversations exactly like the one that we're having right here, and having some more basically professional self-reflection, we want to call it that, in terms of giving people a chance to have their eyes more wide open with respect to the range of experiences that tend to be more common than not. I've been giving some workshops, some extended talks on this, seminars in the past few months, and just want to acknowledge. And so the focus of those have actually been on, you see the title, Eclecticism in Business Fields, where there's this conventional wisdom that business is more eclectic than other quote unquote based disciplines. And so our analyses, and this is actually the current iteration of that working paper that I showed you earlier. I'm going to share the link in a minute. Our analyses suggest that business, when it comes to the experience of people earning the PhD, is more insular than conventional wisdom would predict. And so thank the people at NTU, at Baylor and Cornell for feedback on those extended talks, and I'll be giving a similar seminar next week for Tel Aviv. So happy to communicate in more detail past today, and I'll send these links right now into the chat, and then I'll stop my screen share as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And now, Muir, it's your turn. Tell us what you think, having jumped ship, now you are in the industry, not in academia anymore. So what's your opinion here?
Sure. So thanks. So I'm not going to, I don't have the slides to share, but I'll tell you my story and some of the things that I have observed from others and what some current trends are in terms of careers for people who might be members of STR outside of academia. So as Caterina mentioned, I did a PhD at Wharton in the management department back in the 90s, and went out on the rookie market and was an assistant professor at UT Austin, was there for a few years, and then was in a dual career situation. So moved to Georgetown University to their strategy department, and then left 11 years ago in 2011, which is a long time ago. But you know, having at that point spent almost 10 years as a professor, I had an opportunity to move to a new internal startup at Bloomberg, which is maybe best known, well, more people know what Bloomberg is now that Mike Bloomberg ran for president a couple of years ago. But you know, there's Bloomberg, the TV channel, which is sort of the loss leader for the real company, which is the financial data terminal, which some of you may be familiar with. If you're at a business school, there's probably there's probably a lab of them somewhere in the building. And did economic policy analysis for them for 2 years. And I got the opportunity to do that and was able to make that transition primarily because there was someone from my Wharton class who had left academia before me. He'd gone to McKinsey immediately after the PhD program. And I had lunch with him, and he was one of the people who was leading this new internal venture at Bloomberg. And when he heard that I might be interested in an opportunity outside of academia, pretty much offered me a job right there. And I went to this unit at Bloomberg, was there for about 2 years, had a lot of fun, did interesting work there, which was not terribly technical, but which involved that research ability to synthesize large amounts of data and information to develop a new perspective on something. And so the work that I did there was related to what I had done as a researcher. My dissertation had been on cross-border mergers and acquisitions. So I was familiar with trade, international trade, and investment flows. And I taught corporate strategy and international business as a faculty member, and so knew how to talk about those issues. And so in those first 2 years, when I was really making the transition from academia into industry, that was an important bridge period for me. So the issues that I was working on in 2011 through 2013 were, we were still coming out of the financial crisis, and so there was, and Europe was still very much in the midst of their economic crisis, and there was speculation Greece was going to leave the euro, and you know, what could happen with that, and how is the world going to adjust to this big shock, in particular within the confines of a currency union, an imperfect currency union like the EU was. I also did work on the US-China trade relationship. So at that time, that was still bubbling at that time. No one thought anything would ever actually be done about it. And so I wrote some analysis on what would happen if we actually did have a trade war with China, which I think held up pretty well after that came to pass a few years later. And so that was a time when I was trying to leverage my body of knowledge and my skills in an environment where that made sense. From there, I went to EY to do economic policy analysis with them. They had a shop there that did that. One of the things that appealed to me about it was that it was led by a couple of PhDs. they were econ PhDs, so they hadn't come from business schools, but we spoke the same language in a way. And that was appealing. I worked for them for 3 years before sort of really, well, so doing the economic policy analysis there was interesting. And that market of economic policy analysis is interesting for people coming out of academia, because it's a place where there's still kind of a value for those academic research skills. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and so there's a kind of a market for work that is on currently relevant policy topics that is done with a certain kind of academic rigor. And so for me, that was a good transition from academia into industry, in that skill set that I had to offer was valued in that context. And so I was doing work that was being read by people in the Washington policymaking ecosystem and by people at businesses who had responsibility for their business's relationship with Washington. And that's a path that a number of people coming out of academia have gone down. They've gone through think tanks and through economic policy analysis, because it's that bridge. There's a long, at this point, pretty long history of people doing that, either through policy or through this other related area of economic litigation support. There are firms that do this that are often pretty heavily populated by people with econ PhDs. That's often considered an important credential. And in some cases, there are former academics who lead these organizations or who sort of rotate in and out of them. So speaking of people in strategy, one of the older ones is the Berkeley Research Group, which was really in important ways started by David Teese, who did important work in strategy on dynamic capabilities. And hopefully is still highly cited. I always liked his work. So he was one of the people who started that firm, and they hired PhDs, and they did work for companies that were involved in litigation, where a rigorous economic analysis was an important part of how that was going to play out in court, right? And so those people often serve as expert witnesses. And so that's a related avenue. There's economic policy analysis, there's this litigation support work. From there, I moved into a newer area of data analytics, data science, that has been increasingly used in business, and where the kind of advanced research skills that we learn as PhDs are increasingly valued. And so I'm at a company that collects and analyzes employee data and human capital data. But there are a lot of people who have gone to other tech companies, whether they're established companies like Apple, where Joel Podolny, who was a prominent academic in the Academy of Management, went a number of years ago to lead their professional development arm called Apple University. Or Amazon is, at this point, I think, hires more economists than anyone but the federal government, and where I've lost several good PhD job candidates to recently. And then there's also startups. So have had contact with a number of different startups in my professional role that have people who, one had an ex-Wharton PhD. I think he was from the public policy and management program, so not a strategy person. Another was not a Wharton person, but was in organizational sociology and had read one of my papers, which was great. And I'm working with a startup, a tech startup right now, that on equal pay stuff, which and their chief scientist is an organizational sociologist. So there are definitely people who are out there in doing this, working in industry and using their skills. And what I'd say about what's important is that the research content can be sort of a bridge into industry. But generally speaking, the things that people consider knowledge in industry are sort of different from what we consider knowledge in academia. So I did research on cross-border mergers and acquisitions as an academic, but the things that people are interested in about cross-border mergers and acquisitions in industry are not the things that I was studying as an academic. So I didn't know anything about the folks in industry, what they're interested in cross-border M&A. So that part was not useful. The thing that is, I think, most useful at this point, most broadly applicable, and what the tech companies are really hiring for, is an understanding of research methods, how to apply, how to match a method to a problem, and how to structure the problem and the data in such a way that you can solve it effectively, get to causation and so on. Sometimes very simple things can be seen as very powerful. So I showed a client a transition matrix for thinking about how people move from being low performers to high performers to exiting a company. And that sort of blew their minds. So some simple things like that can be very powerful. And sort of really advanced econometric methods are less important than I think sort of designing the structure of what you're going to analyze. I think lastly, I'd say it's important to recognize that you're going to have to learn a lot of new skills for people who go out, whether that's understanding sort of the much more complex computing environments that exist in industry, and working in much larger teams than we're typically accustomed to. You know, academics are often, you know, solo or working in, you know, small groups. And that you're going to have to also, I think the biggest transition is understanding the difference in priorities. I think when we're thinking about how to approach a problem in academia, we're typically thinking about what's the smartest approach to this that I can take, because I want to take the smartest, most sophisticated approach to this question, because that's going to be the thing that's going to have the biggest impact and is going to, you know, make it through peer review and so on and so forth. But in industry, I think the priority is really around, and I'll put this, you know, crudely for impact. What's the dumbest approach to this problem that will actually get us a result? And because that's usually the thing that is easiest to implement, easiest to explain to other stakeholders, easiest to scale. So it may be that, yes, you could get a little bit more precision by using a really sophisticated method, but if you can get most of the way there with something really simple, then that's almost always going to be the right first answer, right? You know, version 3.0 maybe is going to use that really sophisticated method, but version 1.0 is, you know, if you can do it with OLS, great, do it and move on. And that's a big adjustment. I think that's maybe the biggest adjustment that between how research is done in academia and how the same kinds of problems may be approached by industry. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Muir. Super interesting, especially the last comment about the different use of research that we can do in the two professions, if you like. So I would like to open the floor to the debate. I don't know if we have any questions from the participants. I see that Heather has a question for you that connects your words to those of Annamaria and Kevin, which is essentially if you see any evidence of what Annamaria and Kevin noticed, that there is a decrease in the number of academic positions for PhD students, and hence an increase of the number of PhD students that joined the industry. So did you see an increase in the number of applicants from the PhD ranks?
For sure. I think the career avenues for people out of PhD programs into industry are clearer than they used to be. There are companies that will explicitly advertise in the academic job market cycle and will show up to conferences. I haven't seen it as so much at Academy of Management, although I think it's there. But certainly at the AEA meetings, that's pretty prominent for economists. And so I think there are pipelines for this now. And so the people who I encounter at companies, there are econ PhDs, there are people with backgrounds in IO Psych, there are people with backgrounds in sociology, particularly network theory, that have found a home in industry. And so I think yes, this is a trend that's growing. And I talked to some people on the PhD job market this year who were expressly targeting tech companies and were having success. That there were multiple companies who were explicitly hiring on the rookie market. That's something that we didn't see really when I was coming out, and I think there's more of that. And I think I think that's going to continue for a while because people have begun to figure out that this is a good skill set for thinking through complex problems and determining the right kind of modeling approach to doing this work, especially when working in concert with people with backgrounds in computer science and other kinds of things, so that we can really take something which we would sort of do as kind of a craft approach to modeling, but the computer science people can understand how to then take that and scale it and industrialize it.
Thank you. And I don't know if any of our attendees would like to maybe speak up or write in the chat. And while they do so, I have another question that was raised in the previous editions of this PDW, which is both from a research perspective, so for Annamaria and Kevin, and from an industry perspective. What do you think of sabbatical postings? So what do you think of, or do you have any data about these, Annamaria and Kevin, people who leave academia for a short spell, 1 or 2 years, to join the industry? How does this affect their prospects of going back to academia? Or vice versa for you, Muir, if you know any cases, successful cases of people who leave academia for just a couple of years and then go back. So it's a question for the three of you, essentially.
Personally, I don't have data on sabbatical specifically, but like with our Georgia data, we could distinguish between PhD students that were doing their PhD at Georgia Tech, or they were doing it in collaboration with the industry. And then what we were observing is that there was a clear correlation between having strong ties with industry during the PhD and then getting a job in the industry later after graduation.
Yeah, I can agree. It's a great question. Lack data on it right now, at least, but something that's on our to-do list. And in terms of looking at sector switching, for example. And so one general point I can add, it's we cited in the working paper that I linked across in the chat, is there's a useful phrase, naive optimism. And so whether it's optimism or not, I just want to reaffirm that what it seems like everyone here shares is a common interest to remove the naive part of the labor market experience, basically, of people earning the PhD. So I'm sure it's going to vary across disciplines or sets of fields as well. So for example, let me be clear about that. Somebody from a business school going to work in industry versus somebody in a humanities department going to work in industry for a couple of years, I would expect actually that there'd be different outcomes after year 2 in industry, where, if the pay differential is 2 or 3 times the baseline, then versus not 2 or 3 times the baseline, I think it's reasonable to expect, and the article that I shared with you earlier from the Applied Economics Letters suggests that would be the case. Then that's what I was alluding to with disciplinary differences with what you called sabbatical.
Thank you. Muir, do you host any persons for just short periods of time?
So I haven't hosted people for a short period of time. When I was at EY before, there wouldn't have been a way to do that. It would be more possible, perhaps at Aon. I just hired a rookie PhD statistician and an economist who has been out for about 3 years, working first with the government and then in consulting. Certainly it is a thing that's done, that people will take a sabbatical from academia and go work in industry. I know a number of people who have done that. I think that can work. There are two, I think, criteria in order to make it successful. So first, it's going to be important that you have someone in that organization that you're going to, who's going to be your bridge to the organization, who's going to not just introduce you to people, but who can help to translate between the organization's priorities and your own way of framing things as an academic. Because, as I said, sometimes those priorities maybe don't line up well. I'll give you an example, which is that in thinking about that sabbatical opportunity, often researchers are thinking about the great data that they could get access to, and they're excited about that and how that they could mine that data for some academic purpose, right? So there could be lots of restrictions around how that data can be used that aren't going to work out for your research idea. That's thing one. And thing two, the organization that you're going to may really have no interest in helping to facilitate an academic research project that they're not really going to benefit from. So having the conversation being really clear up front on what each party wants from that, and the kind of resources they can and can't make available, I think would be important for anyone who wanted to do that kind of sabbatical in order to make it successful. And often timelines in industry are very different, right? And so they may think, okay, well, what can you get done in 4 months? And and an academic might be thinking about what they can get done in 18 months, right? And so that can be being aligned on expectations around those things I think is very important to making this successful.
Thank you, Muir. So I think that this comment of yours about having a person to bridge you into the next position resonates with the evidence that Annamaria showed to us about the importance of the advisor and the entrepreneurial experience of the advisor. So your personal experience confirms the results of Annamaria. Super interesting. So I have two questions, one from Mary and the other one from Jared in the chat, to which we have already partially answered, but there is an aspect that maybe we can highlight a bit more. What characteristics are you looking for, Muir, when you want to hire somebody fresh out of a PhD or later on in the career? And for Annamaria and Kevin, what do your data tell us about success stories? Which individuals out of the PhD or later in their careers would be more successful in joining the industry?
So I'll go first on this. So how strong is current demand? Yeah, for management PhDs. So I don't think right now there is sort of a management PhD specific pipeline, because I think it's not a big enough group of people to be well defined. If you're familiar with the organizational sociology, maybe you can talk about the definition of fields and what's the social infrastructure needed, right? Okay, so people don't know what a management PhD is. So when I talk about myself, and I have to admit I'm a hybrid. So my degree says applied economics, and so I've used that fact in some of the work that I've done to to brand myself as an economist. And that's effective, even though, you know, my most highly cited paper was in ASQ, which is probably a sociology journal. So I think the branding oneself as a management PhD is going to be less effective than talking about using some of these more widely understood frames. So economist is a frame that people understand. If you are have a background in organizational psychology, that's something that people understand. Biopsychologists have been working in industry for 100 years and there's very well established roles for them. Network theory is something that more and more people are thinking about in a variety of different applications. And so if you can describe yourself in that way, there are roles that that can be available to you. In terms of, you know, leadership and some other kinds of topics, those also might have some appeal. And then there are the people who frankly just have branded themselves as saying, I'm a data scientist who works on XYZ. The challenge that you face there is that some people are going to expect data scientists to have sort of suite of IT technical skills that you may not have picked up in the PhD program. They're going to expect you to code really well and be familiar with a variety of development tools. But those are kind of the options for how you can interface with the outside world. You know, I recently got a fair amount of applicants because I put out a job that said labor economist, and there aren't many jobs that say labor economist. And so there were a lot of people who were really attracted to that, right? And that was a narrow slice of the job market, but that I got certain people very excited, and those were the exact people who I wanted to get excited about that job posting. So if you look for some of the keywords that would get you really excited, you may find someone who is looking for that exact skill set that you have to offer, and that's a great match.
Thank you, Muir. Annamaria, Kevin, which profile would be the most successful according to your data?
Thanks, Caterina, for the question. So back in the days when we were analyzing this data with Maria Roche on PhD graduates from Georgia Tech, we realized that there was a very strong correlation between the supervisor's investment in patents and in more generally collaborations with industry and the students going into the industry. Of course, this applies to students, like I said before, that were specialized in engineering and basic science disciplines. By the way, this correlation was holding constant several supervisor and student characteristics, including supervisor fixed effects and student past backgrounds and score on GMAT and so on and so forth. Of course, we're far from stating causality, but like the correlations seem to be pretty strong. We then interviewed a number of supervisors back then to try to understand a little bit what was driving this type of correlation. And then two main points came out from these interviews. So one is that clearly, like a supervisor that has connections with the industry, then is able to place the student in the industry later on. It's a matter of like making a phone call and say, hey, I have a good student graduating. Do you have a position for him? And another reason why we were seeing the strong correlations was that supervisors that have contacts with industry are also less negatively biased when it comes to students looking for positions in the industry. What we realized oftentimes from these interviews is that when instead we were interviewing supervisors who had little contacts with the industry, this type of people would typically have a sort of negative bias, like they would consider the implication of the students with industry as a sort of a waste of time or wasted opportunities of the PhD. So that those were the two main aspects that came out from these interviews.
Thank you. It is true that, you know, as a supervisor, sometimes you want to invest more time in those PhD students that are willing to help you to deliver academic publications and not otherwise, especially in management. Maybe in engineering it would be different because of the opportunity of producing patents as well. I can see the difference there. Thank you, Annamaria. Kevin, do you have something you want to share with us? We still have 1 minute left.
I guess I can close on the 1 minute just to acknowledge these are great questions, and for some of the questions the data exists right now, for other questions it doesn't, and you know, going back to my point, more attention would be sensible and valuable on all of these. So this is a good start, and grateful for the chance to be here today and learn more about everyone else's experiences, and look forward to more communication. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Annamaria, and thank you, Muir, and thank you, Heather and the STR division for endorsing the session. So as you know, there will be a video on YouTube for you to watch if you have a desire to spend more time with us. And otherwise, you have our emails, and you can certainly drop us a message, and we will be happy to answer any further questions or doubts that you may have. So thank you again, Annamaria, Kevin, Muir, for your time and your insights. And I wish you all a very good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.